Amina grew up in a modest neighborhood where resources were scarce, but family love and support were abundant. From a young age, she had learned to navigate an often hostile world, where opportunities seemed to slip away as soon as you approached them. But his mother, a strong and resilient woman, had taught him that dignity did not depend on money or social status. This was something no one could take from her, and it was what Amina had cultivated throughout her life. She had to fight adversity with grace, remaining true to her principles, despite the obstacles. Amina was an entrepreneur in the fashion and interior design field, a demanding sector where she had to build her reputation from scratch. She still remembered her first projects, where each piece she created seemed like a small miracle. Her designs were unique, inspired by her heritage and culture, and little by little she had attracted a loyal following. Although she had successes in her career, her greatest pride was in raising her children, Malik and Amira, in an environment full of respect and strong values. Their father, a gentle and caring man, had died unexpectedly in a car accident 5 years before. Since that day, Amina had taken sole responsibility for their education, and she had always found a way to give them what they deserved, while juggling the demands of her career. Despite the challenges she faced, Amina always knew that one day she could give her children a better life. It had been years since she had invested in her dreams, had sacrificed herself to see her children grow up in more comfortable conditions than those she had known. And that summer Sunday, as they walked through the streets towards the restaurant, she felt immense pride overcome her. It wasn't just dinner, it was a celebration of everything she had accomplished, of the journey she had taken to reach this moment. Le Chateau Gourmand was one of the city's most prestigious restaurants, a place where society's elites gathered, where food was served on porcelain plates and where sparkling chandeliers seemed to reflect the wealth and grandeur of those who lingered there. It was the dream place, the one where we went to celebrate special moments, where conversations rose in respectful murmurs and where we could feel, even briefly, part of this world reserved for a rare elite. For Amina, it was more than just a restaurant, it was the materialization of his aspirations. She knew that, growing up in her childhood neighborhood, she would never have imagined one day passing through those doors. And yet, life, with all its difficulties, had brought her this far. She was there, not as an ordinary customer, but as a woman who had overcome many challenges to reach this point in her life. As they entered the restaurant lobby, the smell of fine dining and fresh flowers hung in the air. The atmosphere was elegant, almost intimidating. Amina smiled, trying not to show the nervousness that tightened her stomach. She glanced at her children. Malik, his son, a young man already tall and affable, walked beside him with calm confidence, his gaze proud. Amira, on the other hand, seemed more reserved, but she was slowly blossoming in this luxurious atmosphere. Their clothes, although clean and neat, had a simplicity that seemed to stand out in this environment of opulence. With every step they took, Amina felt the eyes of the other customers on her. Murmurs rose up in the room, almost imperceptible but yet tangible. She felt them like needles of judgment, like a dull heat emanating from the room. She tried to ignore them, to stay focused on her family, but the further she went, the more she felt like an intruder, a specter among the elites who seemed to be sizing her up from the corner of their eyes. When they arrived at their table, an older waiter greeted them with a polite but somewhat distant smile. "Sorry, ma'am, it seems we had an error in the reservation. We need you to wait a moment," he said with forced gentleness. Amina felt destabilized for a moment, but she quickly recovered. She smiled politely and replied, "It's no problem. We can wait." She turned to her children to give them a sign of calm, but even they were starting to feel uneasy. Malik, with his head held high, looked around him, trying to understand this strange atmosphere. Amira, her hands clenched in her knees, stared at the ground, but her eyes betrayed her uneasiness. She was only a child, but she knew something was wrong. A few minutes after the elderly waiter left, another member of staff arrived, a younger man, probably in his 30s. He looked visibly uncomfortable, his hands trembling and his gaze shifting. He stood straight in front of Amina, his eyes glued to the ground, as if every word he said was an attempt to justify himself before it was even spoken. "Please excuse me, ma'am," he began, his voice hesitant, "but it looks like the place is full this evening. We have a strict capacity policy and, I'm afraid it may no longer be possible to serve you. Amina felt her heart speed up in her chest, but she took care to maintain an Olympian calm. She knew this kind of response, these almost too clean excuses, these meaningless formulas. It wasn't just a booking error, no. She knew exactly what it was. What was happening here was not the result of a misunderstanding. She had already experienced this kind of situation in other places, where she had been told that the room was full, or that reservations were reserved for a particular clientele. But never would she have imagined that this would happen in a place as prestigious as Le Chateau Gourmand. She took a quick look at her children. Malik, the soul of a young man already awakened to the injustices of the world, looked at her with obvious incomprehension, but also a sadness that he did not know how to express. Amira, the youngest, stood near her, her eyes downcast, murmuring in a fragile breath, "Mom, why are they treating us like this?" The question pierced the air thick with tension, like an arrow in a stifled silence. Amina felt a weight settle on her heart, the pain of seeing her children innocent, confronted with a reality that she had always hoped to spare them. Yet she knew that this was her fight, and that as a mother, she had to show them, in this very moment, what it meant to stand up in the face of adversity, never giving up. She took a deep breath, avoiding letting her voice shake. Each word had to be precise, measured. She stood up slowly, her gaze diving into that of the waiter, straight and direct. "I'm asking you to do me a favor," she said, calm but firm. "Call your manager. I would like to clarify this misunderstanding." The young waiter seemed embarrassed, but he had no choice but to comply. A few moments later, the manager arrived. He was a man in his 40s, impeccably dressed in a three-piece suit, but with an air of overconfidence, almost arrogant. He walked forward slowly, looking disdainful, and glanced quickly at Amina and her children. His eyes slid over their simple clothes, then rested for a moment on the black skin of this family, an expression that deceived no one. He frowned slightly, as if the scene was an affront to his perception of things. The message was clear. This family did not belong to that world. "Madam," he said in a voice tinged with condescension, "I'm sorry, but we have a very strict policy on customer selection. We cannot accept people who have not made prior reservations." Amina felt a wave of anger rise within her. His eyes didn't leave the manager, but his calm was like armor. She knew that what he meant, without daring to say it, was that a black woman, alone with her children, was not worthy of passing through these doors. This statement was implicit in the tone of his voice, in the way he looked at her and assessed her, like an object he allowed himself to glance at to make a quick assessment. The restaurant, this sanctuary of the elite, was not made for her, nor for her children. He thought so. He was sure of it. Amina, clenching her fists, kept her voice calm, but each word struck like a hammer. "I understand," she said. "But I refuse to be treated like this. You will either serve me or give me an explanation." The manager gave a hint of a smile, but it was not a smile of courtesy. It was a smile that denoted arrogance, the desire to belittle. "You must leave," he said coldly. "That's how it is." These words rang through the air like a judgment bell. It was not a simple refusal, it was a rejection, an attempt to impose on him his place in society, a place inferior to that of his hosts. Amina, her face contorted with anger, but still in control, took her children's hands. She felt their warmth, their innocence, and their confusion, but she didn't give in. She knew that this moment would mark a turning point in their lives. She turned towards the exit, her steps heavy but sure. Malik followed her in silence, but his gaze did not leave the manager's, as if to send him a silent message of challenge. Amira, silent and lost, remained close to her mother, her small body leaning against her as if to protect herself from the injustice she had just seen. The customer's eyes fell on her, curious, disapproving, perhaps even embarrassed. They looked at her as one observes a slippage in a world too clean, too polished, too well-oiled to accept an intrusion. This sweet but bitter heat invades his body. Amina had never felt such deep humiliation, but in that moment she knew this was not the end. No, it was the beginning. It was the start of a larger fight, a fight against discrimination which, although subtle and insidious in places like this, did exist. The weeks passed, but the humiliation suffered by Amina in the restaurant remained anchored within her, like a persistent burn. She returned to her daily life with quiet determination, immersing herself in her work, running her business and caring for her children with the habit and professionalism that characterized her. But deep inside her, something burned, a flame that wouldn't go out. The injustice of that evening had shaken her, but she knew that this pain could not define her. No, she would not be a victim. Every night, as she fell asleep, she thought about that precise moment in that restaurant where she had been treated like an outsider, like someone who had no place in this so-called refined world. The condescending smiles, the furtive glances, the certainty that she was not like them. They had rejected it, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. She could not let this injustice go unnoticed, nor let it take root in her soul like a defeat. She didn't want an event like this to tarnish her dignity. Amina then told herself that her revenge should not be a simple impulsive response. It would be bigger, stronger. It would not be an act of blind anger, but a considered approach, a strategic move, which went well beyond simple personal revenge. She embarked on a secret quest. She was going to take control of this restaurant, not to humiliate him in turn, but to make it a symbol, a declaration of her place in this world where we sometimes seek to erase those who do not fit a certain model. She started using her network. Amina had always cultivated relationships in the business world, working tirelessly to build her empire. She knew exactly who to contact for the necessary information, and she used her financial contacts to gain access to the restaurant's private information. The owners were in financial difficulty, their image tarnished by minor scandals. Perfect ground for Amina to enter the scene, not with a simple check, but with very specific intentions. Months passed, and gradually, Amina acquired a substantial share of the restaurant's shares. She became an influential shareholder, moving ever closer to the goal she had set for herself. At each meeting, she observed, listened, learned and, most importantly, prepared for the moment when she could take complete control of the establishment. It was not an acquisition made in haste. It was a careful plan, executed with the patience of a woman determined to show that her existence could not simply be erased. In a few months, thanks to her financial contacts and her skillful strategy, Amina managed to buy back the majority of the shares of Chateau Gourmand. This restaurant, which had once rejected her and treated her like a stranger, would now be under her control. Not only had she regained her dignity, but she would also transform this space into a place where people would be forced to respect her, both as an owner and as a woman. The Chateau Gourmand would henceforth be his kingdom. On the day of the inauguration under his direction, Amina entered the restaurant accompanied by her children, Malik and Amira. This time, it was not the contemptuous looks from the customers and staff that she would receive, but curious, questioning looks. This time, she was the person to be honored. She was no longer there to be judged, but to occupy her rightful place. It was no longer the restaurant of a group of elites who sought to impose their conception of society on it. It was his. It was his victory. The staff, still unaware of who she was, watched her enter with skepticism. The manager, still full of himself, greeted her with a condescending air, as if she were just another customer, without knowing that he was about to receive the biggest surprise of his career. He approached her, his haughty posture ready to welcome a client he already considered inferior, a woman who had no place. When he bowed slightly to her, a look of mock professionalism on his face, Amina raised her hand to stop him. She didn't need to give it more importance. She was above this spectacle. "I'm Amina, the new owner," she announced calmly, but with an unmistakable authority that echoed in the air. The manager froze for a moment, his eyes wide, trying to understand what he had just heard. But Amina didn't give him time to recover. "And today," she continued with a firm voice, "this restaurant is changing." The manager, stunned, immediately turned pale when he understood the extent of his error. His eyes widened, his lips barely trembling as he realized he had just denied access to the person he had just humiliated. His movements became clumsy, an expression of deep confusion appearing on his face. But Amina, in her calm determination, was not there to take revenge on him specifically. No, she was there for something much bigger than this isolated moment. She was there to assert her place, her dignity, and that of her community. She was there to show the world that a place belonged to her and to all those who were ignored or marginalized. She knew it well. It was not this manager nor this humiliation that would define her, but the impact she would have. Amina was not there to get a simple personal revenge. She had a nobler and more powerful goal: to change the rules of the game. She wanted this restaurant, this place that had tried to force her to bend, to become a model of respect and equality. She was not going to let this injustice settle in people's minds nor allow others, like her, to suffer such treatment. A few days after taking over as owner, Amina called a meeting with all the staff. She wanted everyone to understand what she represented and what she demanded. During this meeting, she stood up, with unquestionable authority, and looked each of the employees in the eyes. The silence in the room was complete, with everyone feeling both intimidated and curious to discover the person behind this radical decision. "I want you to understand something," she began in a calm but firm voice, each word echoing around the room. "I will no longer tolerate any form of discrimination here. This restaurant is not the place to judge people based on their appearance, their social class, or their skin color. We will no longer distinguish between who deserves to be treated with respect and who does not." She paused, letting her words sink into everyone's minds. "I'm here to transform this place. We're going to completely reevaluate our hospitality policy. No more favoritism. No more contempt. Starting today, every guest, whether from high society or from a working-class neighborhood, will receive the same level of respect and service. We must show that inclusion, dignity, and respect are the true values we stand for." Amina's gaze became more piercing, more determined. "This is your chance to be part of a change. Those who cannot adapt to these values must go. I have no place here for incompetents or racists. We will never let appearance or bias dictate how we treat our customers. Those who do not live up to these principles will, without hesitation, be replaced." The employees' faces, initially tense, began to relax. Some seemed surprised by the firmness of the approach, others admired it in silence. But it was clear that change was coming, and no one could stop it. The manager, who was still having difficulty digesting the situation, was one of the first to understand that his position was no longer tenable. After this meeting, Amina made the decision to oust him. He had been one of the main instigators of the humiliation she had suffered, and he was no longer able to be part of this new era she wanted to usher in. She could not tolerate an individual who, in the past, had embodied the worst aspects of discrimination. Like the other employees complicit in this situation, he was fired on the spot. The restaurant door closed behind him with a quiet certainty. Amina no longer had room for those who allowed themselves to abuse their power. To replace this team, Amina put together a new management team. She looked for competent people, from different backgrounds, with deep respect for the values she wanted to implement. She chooses individuals of all ages, backgrounds, but with one thing in common: an unwavering commitment to equality and inclusion. The new director of the department, for example, was a black woman who had long worked in establishments where discrimination was commonplace, but who, like Amina, had always refused to let it happen. She brought with her a refreshing perspective and a natural authority that quickly made her respected by all staff. The changes, however, did not stop at management. Amina ensured that every member of staff, from the kitchen to the servers, was trained not only in quality service standards, but also in principles of diversity and respect. Workshops were organized to teach everyone what it means to work in an inclusive, respectful, and egalitarian environment. The prejudices and stereotypes that had fueled tensions in the past were gradually deconstructed, and a new climate of benevolence gradually took hold. The Chateau Gourmand was never the same again. The change was evident in the way customers felt welcomed. The smiling faces of the staff, without distinction, greeted each customer with genuine respect. Old divisions, based on appearance or social class, were abolished, and a new spirit reigned in the restaurant, that of equality. Customers came not only for the quality of the cuisine, but also for the warm, inclusive, and open atmosphere that reigned there. The restaurant's reputation changed radically. The Chateau Gourmand became a symbol of success for the city's black community. It was now a place where everyone, regardless of their social status, was welcomed with dignity and respect. This restaurant was no longer just an establishment where people ate well. It had become a place where social justice took shape, a place where inclusion and integrity were non-negotiable. Amina, through her intelligence, patience, and integrity, had transformed what had been a source of pain into a model of success. She was no longer just a customer. She was the queen of her own kingdom. It was no longer an act of revenge, but an act of leadership, an act of reaffirmation. His success came not just from purchasing a restaurant, but from transforming a symbolic place of injustice into a sanctuary of dignity and respect.